you wrote a memo to the entire Republican House membership warning about the dangers of objecting on January 6th. I think it was dated January 3rd or 2nd. Yeah. And you know, it went through case by case. But the big picture thing is, it's not up for Congress to usurp the right of the states to certify their own electoral votes.
Yeah, I felt it was necessary because we were getting questions from Republican members about two big things. One was, what's really happening in the courts? Because, of course, you had the Trump campaign making these claims. And so I thought it was important to walk through the major decisions, and frankly, also to point out that in a number of these cases where the courts had rejected the claims, the judges had been appointed by Donald Trump. So this wasn't a situation where, you know, this was a partisan review by any means. But I also thought it was important to explain to people what our constitutional responsibility was. And look, I think what's happened now, sadly, is because the majority of Republicans objected in 2020, 2021, that has become a precedent now. And you're already seeing Johnson, Stefanik, others saying, well, you know, we're going to have to see, as Stefanik said, we'll have to see whether or not the election is legal and valid. And that's tyranny. If Congress decides we're only going to count the votes to certify an election if, you know, the person that we wanted wins that election.
Okay, so your memo didn't convince the majority of your colleagues, and the majority did, in fact, go through and voted to object. But I want to ask you, because you write about it quite vividly in this book, the objection started before the attack on the Capitol, before they actually came into the building, I should say.
Yeah.
Then the Capitol is evacuated. Congress has to go out of session. Dramatic scene, we all know. You come back in session at 8 o'clock the evening of January 6th. And then you, in the interim, you're going to your colleagues who had objected and you're saying, look, you may have disagreed with me before the attack on the Capitol. You can't disagree with me now.
Right.
I mean, for the sake of the country.
Yeah.
We have to be unified now. And yet, they all voted again, including Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah, and that was one of the most...
To throw out electoral votes.
Right. And there, so when we were evacuated, I was on the phone with Kevin. We were still in the Ways and Means room. And he told me, I said, all right, we got to get back into session. He said, yeah, that's the plan. He said, I'm going to make a speech. I think he said, I'm going to make a speech about America and unity. And we're not going to continue to object. So I hung up with him and I went out into the larger room again and I told his general counsel, listen, I just talked to Kevin, we're going back into session, we're not going to continue objecting. And she said to me, she said, you know, Jim Jordan just told me that he just talked to Kevin and Kevin said we are going to continue objecting. Wow. And I, you know, I thought, well, Jim Jordan's lying, like, you know, it wouldn't be the first time. So, but as it turned out, Kevin had been lying and continued. I was sitting on the floor of the House listening to him speak, and this is, you know, the Capitol, the glass is still shattered. The Capitol had been under attack, had just been cleared, and certainly that's the moment for leadership and the moment to say, we're going to come together as a nation, we're doing our duty. Joe Biden has been elected president, we're going to count those votes, but that's not the decision that Kevin made.
So I want to ask you about a decision you made 6 days later, which was you put out a statement saying that you would vote to impeach Donald Trump. And I've said this to you before, I think this statement became the thesis statement for basically all the work of the January 6th committee beyond. So I want to read, and it's not a long statement, so if you don't mind, I'll read you say on January 6, 2021, a violent mob attacked the United States Capitol to obstruct the process of our democracy and stop the counting of presidential electoral votes. This insurrection caused injury, death, and destruction in the most sacred space in our republic. Much more will become clear in the coming days and weeks, but what we know now is enough. The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the President. The President could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by a President of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. So, how did you have that clarity at that moment when so many others did not? I mean, and you said in that statement, we will learn much more in the coming days, and we did learn much more. Yeah. But none of it deviated from what you wrote in that statement on January 12th.
Yeah, I knew, and I remember as I was, being evacuated with my colleagues down the steps, out of the House chamber, into the tunnels under the Capitol while the mob was attempting to get into the chamber. At that moment, I knew Donald Trump must be impeached and he must be removed from office. He was obviously then still in office, and I viewed him as a clear and present danger to the nation. So my view was immediately then, there was no question. And the truth of the matter is, if you go back and you look at what, my colleagues were saying both privately and publicly, I was not the only one who believed that. And interestingly, if you look at there was a resolution drafted by a number of House Republicans on January 10th to censure Donald Trump. And the language of that resolution is almost identical to the language of the article of impeachment in terms of laying out what Donald Trump did. So there was widespread agreement that he was responsible, that it had been a violation of his duty. And, you had some members arguing, well, if we impeach him, it will just simply further the division in the country. People making the judgment that, yes, he was wrong, but we shouldn't impeach. But even most of those people understood fundamentally that this isn't to America. It's not who we are, and it's intolerable conduct from a president. And I think part of the story of this period of time is what happened, how quickly we went from a real, almost unanimous understanding of what had happened to people being willing to embrace Donald Trump and bring him back into the fold.